I'd like to welcome everybody to the fourth annual Gamecock Teaching Days. This is the fourth set of panels on the second day, and this series of events highlights some of the best and most creative online teaching across the college. My name is Matthew Wilson. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Political Science and very happy to be here. And I'm introducing Kristin Harrell, who is a PhD candidate in the Department of English Language. They have a BFA in Studio Art, an MA in Cultural Studies and Comparative Literature, and a graduate certificate in Women's Studies.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here as part of Gamecock Teaching Days, and thank you everybody for coming to see my presentations. So today I'm going to be talking about my experience using role play in my hold on one second, there we go. In my English 288 college classroom. I'll start by discussing a valuable resource for role-playing games that is available to everyone, and how I adopted one of these games for my online class, and I'll give a little bit of student feedback. As a little background as to why I got into this, I have a master's in pop culture studies, as Matthew said, and now I'm working on a doctorate in Middle English literature. So these are very two widely varied in time period and in subject matter. So I love when I can blend these two interests together in the classroom and help students use new media to discover a relevancy in older literature, etc. Also, I am a big Dungeons and Dragons geek, so incorporating scholarly role play was something that I got really excited about. But that being said, you do not have to have formal role-playing experience to incorporate role-playing in your classroom. Let's see. For my English 288 class, I chose a role-playing game by an organization called the Reacting Consortium, based at Barnard College. These games, called the Reacting to the Past series, are developed and play tested by professors and scholars in universities and colleges across the US. After extensive play testing, analysis, and feedback, they are then published for the public. Before I begin, I'd like to point out that although the game I selected was geared towards the English classroom, Reacting to the Past publishes a lot of games across disciplines. Each of their games has one central premise, and that's that students are given the roles of historical figures and asked to delve into a specific moment in time when their characters were attempting to resolve a conflict. The main goal is not for students to recreate that moment exactly, but instead for the participants to immerse themselves in the context of these great debates. And these can be in history, in science, art, or ethics. And this is to understand the complexity of cultural history. Students then present oral and written works to the class. Most of these games result in a vote or a decision that's decided on by the class, which does not necessarily have to end the way that the actual event occurred. What this does is it allows for a teaching moment of discussing how and why culture evolves as it does. While this may sound a bit overwhelming to integrate into the classroom, especially if this is your first time, the Reacting to the Past series provides really nice resources that are super helpful. To start, they provide free instructor's manuals, which give instructions and tips for setting up the classroom space for each student to have their specific character sheets, and then how the teacher can run the debate, grade written work, and then any other information they need to sort of gear the class up for this game. The character sketches that Reacting to the Past provide, they are for the students, so the instructor can just distribute those straight to the students. And they talk about the character's history, give a little bio, what the character would be interested in, the motivations, how the students are going to be expected to be involved in the assignments, as well as what primary sources the students should consult for developing their written compositions. And so here in this slide, you see an example of where they're giving a standard schedule where 7 meetings of 75 minutes, but they also do modified schedules if you wanted to do it in shorter amount of times. Reacting to the Past also publishes student manuals, which are nicely produced paperbacks, and these can be ordered through the university bookstore or major retailers. So this little compact book provides students with rules, how they're going to be graded on their participation, as well as the selection of excerpts from primary sources and an overview of the cultural history during the time that they will be debating. As many of you have noticed by now, the reacting games are geared toward in-person teaching. I too had planned for my class to play this game in class, and the 8 weeks I had allotted were beginning in March 2020. So as all of us did, I had to scramble to figure out how to suddenly switch this game to an online format. What you'll see for the rest of this presentation is my own modification of the game to fit my needs and the needs of my students. For my class, I had selected the game called Stages of Power, Marlowe and Shakespeare, 1592. In this, the Queen of England has decided to open up the theaters after a time of plague. And yes, the irony was frequently referenced by the students. The Queen has asked her Privy Council to select between 2 works of playwrights, that of Christopher Marlowe and William Shakespeare. I assigned the students the roles of actors, vocal members of the community, or Privy Council members. Those who were assigned the roles of actors for each playwright were expected to debate the merits of their own play. And they did this using persuasive speeches, research of primary sources, and any performative work that they chose to present. Students who were assigned as members of the Privy Council would make their final decision based on these persuasive arguments and presentations. They would then debate among themselves as to which play was superior based on entertainment value or morality codes, or even just what the Queen was interested in. They would then write a defense of their decision for the class. The society members, the students who were assigned as society members, attempted to sway the vote through private alliances, published op-eds, and oral speeches regarding the social merits or failings of each play. They were, in effect, what I called the social influencers of the game. To facilitate this as best I could for an online environment, I created a website with several components that could adapt to student communication. While this may sound like a major undertaking, there are actually many online web platforms that allow this to be accomplished without any need for web design, training, or coding knowledge, etc. Also, a lot of these aspects that I included, such as the blog or the forums, are available on current platforms that universities provide, such as Blackboard. And I'm always happy to answer any questions regarding setup or design or the technical stuff if you ever want to contact me. First, I created a Broadside blog, which you see an example of over on this slide, where students posted weekly defenses or persuasive analyses or editorials. For anyone unfamiliar with the term, broadsides were pamphlets distributed publicly, sometimes anonymously, and they could be informative for the community or they could be inflammatory. To keep the students' interest, I allowed them to treat this like a social media site. They could like or comment on their peers' posts. They could even troll one another as long as it was a counter argument substantiated by primary sources. Students could use this space to post visuals as long as the visuals were in keeping with the tone and regulations of Elizabethan culture, which honestly, if you know anything about Elizabethan theater culture, that gave them a little bit of leeway. And just like social media, the students created a profile for their character, and they used a historical image whenever it was available. They were expected to stay in character while on the website and refer to one another by their historical names. Students were unaware which of their peers were playing other roles, unless they specifically asked them or scheduled Zoom meetings or they were friends, etc. I didn't discourage them knowing, but at the same time, I didn't tell anybody who the others were. And so in the slide, what you're seeing on the left, you're seeing a post that one of the students did. And then on the right, you're seeing some of the comments. And the first one and the last one are from the ones who are actors in Shakespeare's troupe. And so of course they're saying, I totally agree. And then you have the one in the middle who was with Marlowe's troupe saying, no, the play does X, Y, and Z, and it's great for these reasons. Next, I added a private forum to the website where each team could communicate privately. They could plan their debate strategies, and then they could compile their resources here. And you see that on the left of this slide. To supplement this, I added a messenger function where students could contact me quickly through private chat, or they could communicate in real time with their teammates to coordinate or create private alliances that no one else would know about. Students could be themselves in the private forum. I told them on the private forum or in the messenger, you don't have to stay in character. But interestingly, the majority of them still did stay in character, which I found funny. One quick side note about the distribution of these character roles. While it's totally acceptable and sometimes advisable to assign these at random, I chose to distribute a short survey prior to the game to find out what my students' strengths and fears were about this game, so that I could try to match them with roles that better suited their needs for the class. Students who were assigned the roles of society members, for instance, had more written assignments to post each week. Those students who were chosen as actors were expected to create a persuasive and a creative presentation using whatever multimedia resources were available to them. And the Privy Council members had to do a lot of research. They had to research historical morality codes, religious debates, cultural influences, etc. While everyone was expected to participate and complete their specific assignments, having this allocated role division where it was tailored to the students' interests allowed me to make any accommodations regarding technological limitations, special needs, or social anxiety. I mean, after all, they signed up for an English class, not a theater class. Lastly, the website provided resources to students to perform their research. For this assignment, I chose Shakespeare's Richard III and Marlowe's Dr. Faustus as the text that they would be debating / presenting. So I posted a public domain version of these plays for them to read. And whenever it was possible, I also posted links to performances. I also listed bibliographies. I linked to the websites, which I found to be scholarly resources, and I created an FAQ for using the materials. This may sound like a lot of work, but as you're doing it, you kind of find all this stuff in the same place a lot of times. And now for the really fun part, the results. The students actually read the plays in their entirety while out of school at the beginning of a pandemic. This alone would have made the entire game worth it. Interestingly, only a few students had ever read Shakespeare, and less surprisingly, none of them had ever read Marlowe. At the end of the game, I had quite a few students comment on how they never knew Shakespeare was so good, or that Dr. Faustus was so dark and compelling. Of course, they all said the plays were initially difficult to read. We know initially there means that they were difficult. And it took them longer than they expected. So they had to spend more time than they expected. But they powered through and they didn't really complain to me about it at all. And sometimes they commented to me of how they really were enjoying the process. Next, the students actually used the primary sources. Now, this may sound like I had very low expectations of the students or doubted their abilities, but that's totally not the case. It's more that even for me, these primary sources were incredibly detailed. I mean, you see here a sample of some of the ones they suggested and had excerpts of, such as Machiavelli or Aristotle or Erasmus. These treatises were based in religious rebellions, copies of morality codes, philosophical tracts, which would have been discussed, and debates over the purpose of theater. To my surprise, in order to win the game, so to speak, several students incorporated even more primary sources to support their cause. They would actually search down other speeches or treatises on what they were interested in. One student, for instance, who had been quiet and reticent in the earlier part of the semester, messaged me to request a Zoom call to discuss intricacies of 16th century religion, Church of England versus the Catholic Church, and political sway. And that wasn't even part of his assignment. He was just interested in it. And you see here on this slide to the right where another student, they chatted with me and they said, hey, I've got some stuff I'm interested in. Can I talk to you about it? It's like, yeah, what are you interested in? And what you see here is probably about a quarter of what they sent to me, where they're going through all of this back and forth about what they've seen. So this was very pleasant for me as an instructor to see them engaging with it. Now, not everybody was enthralled by primary sources, but I often found that those students who were not drawn to this aspect of the game were really drawn to the multimedia aspect of the game. They had a lot of fun with it, and because it was my game and I was interested in their creativity, I let them have fun with it. So these are my examples of the students' work where they were playing around with their roles. So for instance, teams were tasked with creating persuasive presentations of their respective plays. I just asked for something eye-catching and persuasive. They exceeded my expectations. In the bottom left, you see here an example. A couple students posted videos of themselves. Actually, it was more than a couple. It's probably 6 or 7. Posted videos of themselves performing scenes from the plays. And they used TikTok or Snapchat filters to give themselves costumes. The majority of my class was actually female, so they would give themselves facial hair and beards so that they could perform these different characters. The one you see here, she's performing as a ghost, and so she made eerie movements in the background with a filter and changed her voice, and then performed one of the scenes. And she also included the blocking here of the scene, which I found really interesting. Others researched Elizabethan theater, and they drafted set designs, which you see in the bottom in the middle here. Some did costume ideas and even lighting schemes for their production, although they were a little disappointed when I informed them they would not have had electricity. One team even researched the music of the time and played it during the background of their presentation. Those who were the social influencers, as I called them, for the game, chose various tactics as well. Some would use the writing styles and spelling of the time. They would try to sound like they were Shakespearean characters, and they would include woodblock illustrations, as you saw on one of the previous slides, in order to catch the other students' attention, because they wanted as many likes on their post as possible, and they wanted as many comments on their post as possible. Some would pan other plays by citing all the ways in which it violated morality codes, etc. One student, and you see here one on the top left and on the right, even created memes using historical images. And then she sent them to players privately to blackmail them for votes. This was one of those that was on the border. I'm like, this isn't Elizabethan, but it's super creative. And then I started seeing the other students respond in character to these blackmails and outrage and discuss it on their teams. And so I let it slide. It was my game. I thought it was creating a better environment for the game and engaging the students. I also asked her why she felt that she could do this as part of her as part of her game. And she said that she had researched her character and it was shown that he was not opposed to creating controversy. And that was her justification for blackmailing everyone. At the end of the game, I collected student responses, asking them to be as candid as possible. In response to the online platform as a whole, just being online in general, students' reactions were mixed, of course. Some said they would have much preferred an in-class environment, especially because of the interactions of this game. Definitely a concern also for students at the beginning of isolation, at the beginning of a pandemic. Coincidentally or not, most of these comments came from those who asked or were recruited to be actors. So that was where most of this, I wish it was in person, came from, those performers. Other students greatly preferred role-playing online. Some preferred the freedom and the anonymity of the website. They said that writing from the perspective of another persona allowed them to feel less self-conscious. And then they also it was easier for them to engage in debates with each other. From my standpoint, I saw this in the students. Students who had been absolutely silent or very hesitant to speak up in the first half of the semester, they really blossomed in the game, both in participation and the quality of their work. Most of the students felt the online platform also allowed them a lot more flexibility in meeting with their teams, in taking time with the texts, communicating with others. And they even said it made it seem easier and more conducive to talk to me or to ask me questions. In response to role playing, a majority of them noted that it not only increased their interest in the class, but in the work themselves. And it also gave them skills that they didn't have before to really close read the texts. Having the cultural references and the philosophical insight into the time the plays were written and performed allowed them to better understand the subtext of the work, which they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. I felt that the students were really protective of their assigned plays, and they would comb through it to find why it was truly great and how they were defending it. So if you asked a student, hey, did you like Richard III? They'd be like, yes, it's the greatest play ever. And it's like, okay, well, but did you like it? And so I found that they were invested in what was good about the plays, but they were also really learning how to be critical and to critique the different texts. Meanwhile, role-playing also allowed them to interact and respond to the classmates in ways they felt uncomfortable doing in the traditional classroom. The debates and the presentations and the competition offered an alternate experience of literature compared to the standard read a book, discuss, write a paper format that I had used at the beginning of the semester. I will definitely use these reacting to the past games as a starting point in my future classes, and I encourage all of you to check out their resources. You don't have to dedicate 6 weeks to the games. I've used role-playing games in my classroom that were 1 day or 1 week, and they had similar positive results. I was, of course, worried that 6 weeks was too long, but I had this opportunity and I just went for it, and I'm really glad I did. I was, of course, concerned that the students would react or that they would just ghost me since it went online, that they would just disappear or not really perform. But this project seemed to increase the camaraderie between the students. So here you see where one of the students actually made trophies. The students all voted on MVPs for their teams or people who did outstanding performances. And then one of the students made trophies and posted them online for each of the students. So it really helped build a community in my class that I had not expected. As for online role playing, not only did it engage them, but it was helpful and inspiring for me to see my students interact and exhibit their strengths. Frankly, their diverse interests meant that I learned a lot too. Some of the stuff I had never read. Online role playing was a medium that felt like a less intimidating way for the students to approach difficult literature. They responded well. They learned how to close read this literature. And all the while, this met my core objectives that I needed for the class. To sum it all up, I found this experience to be highly successful. In a time when we're rethinking how to make online learning more engaging for our students, I definitely feel that role-playing games such as these